to show you how I did this, and then you can finish working on your stuff. Okay, I'll have the lecture. It's already up on Canvas and all that. But I want you to see how this thing was created. So there's only a few items that are over here. It's a very simple setup. The cube is just this, so that's not even really part of it. That's just for, so we have a ground. The rest of it is right here. All right. So I'm going to make a new document. And you can do regular text. So there is an object here where if we go to this, I can go to text. I can type text and it shows up and I can create it, whatever. We're going to use this thing called MoGraph. And what MoGraph is basically a way to animate stuff inside of Cinema apart from just setting basic keyframes. Okay? It basically is, let's say, effects for objects. So I'm going to go to this MoText, which is right there. You'll see that I get a whole bunch of stuff here for ways that I can customize the depth of it. Do not be afraid to play with this. I'm not going to go through all of these things and what every single button does inside here. But just based on what you already know about some of these definitions and your ability to click and drag, I'm fairly confident you'll be able to see what the ones we need to play with at least do. Okay. So for this, I want you to use your last name. Or your last name and first initial, the back row. Pick a cool font. Oops. Okay, that's an awesome font there. That looks like something cool that could be broken apart. Something curvy is kind of girly, right? I need to see my lines in this. All right, so that's good. We'll just leave it just like that. Okay. So now here's where the magic comes in. Under MoGraph, I have a polyFX. Okay. Now I turn that on and nothing happens. I go to transform, I do this, nothing's going on. We have to create that relationship between the poly effect and that MoGraph item. Okay, so if you look here in this one, see how I have my poly effects under my text? That's how I have to create it, right? So if I go to this, all I have to do is drag this in there. Okay? So now when I start to play with this, see how everything's coming apart. Okay? Now look at how it's coming apart, because that's going to be an important thing, because how I had all those little dots is made up of what's going to make this look cool. I'm just going to go and kind of spread these apart like this. All right, there we go. All right. So now what this is doing is it's taking each one of these faces. Now imagine, I don't know what this is, but did you see it? Imagine we have this cap and all these faces are going around it. This face here is moving away from the surface like this. This face, because it's facing upwards, is going to move this way. This one is going to move that way. Okay? So that's what's happening on this. All of these faces are just moving away from where they were. We don't have any randomness to this yet. So in some of these spots, like where you see the flat lettering, like this, because all those were already facing the same direction, they're all moving in the same exact fashion. Okay? So now here's where this is cool, is that with this poly effect selected, I can add effectors to it. Okay? Effectors are things that are just like add-ons to that specific effect. So if I go under MoGraph effector, surprise, there is a random one. So if I click on random, boom, everything goes apart. So what this is doing is taking their initial position and just like exploding it apart. Okay? Just like you're further apart now. You're further moved. And that's awesome, right? That is super cool. Maya, not to knock Maya, but it can't do this. Well, it couldn't do this. I think it can do it now. All right. So now we need a way to control this. So what's happening is our poly effects is basically just doing the entire thing. It's just like affecting the entire thing all at once. I need to have an area where I could say, affect this area, do not affect this area. Okay? That's where fall off comes in. And you'll see a lot of these tools will have fall off. Okay? Right now it's set to infinite. You can see the word infinite right there. Basically everything has this effect on it. If I go to, just to show you, if I go to weight and I pull this down, it goes away, and now it's on. Okay. If I go to infinite and I change this to a shape, okay, I'm eventually going to use linear. That's the one I like for this kind of effect. But just so you can see, I'm going to choose box, and I get this box. And as I move this box around, see how it's like busting it apart? Okay, there's two spots inside here. There's a light salmon color in the center, and then this yellowy box on the outside. The yellow box is where the effect is. The little salmon box is where the effect is 100%, and in between is a drop-off. Okay, just so it doesn't all happen at once. Now, we have the little dots right here, right, just like we've seen before, and we can drag those dots out. And so what we should see is more of an animation of the effect. So you see when it gets into that in-between area between the yellow and the salmon, that we get this nice little effect. And then we get right in the center the whole effect. Sweet. Okay.
When we animated stuff, we had the camera moving. We could have like this effect moving as we.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's the idea, is that we're going to have that whole effect sliding along. Okay. Cool. Now, I don't typically like to animate right on the poly effect. I like to use the poly effect as just a way to break it apart. That's what it's meant for. Okay. So I'm going to go to my transform here and just reset these to 0. Okay. So now this poly effect isn't doing. I'm going to set that back to infinite. The poly effect is not actually breaking this, or is not actually moving any of the pieces. It broke it. Okay. But all the movement now is coming from the random. Okay. This random that's here is still doing something. Again, I can test that out by just doing here to box. And now whatever's inside that box will have some sort of random movement. Oops. Grab this the correct direction. There we go. Okay. Now, before we get too deep into this, this looks pretty ugly. I don't like these huge pieces. Okay. Every face on this, okay, every one of these little faces that's here is exploding outward, and they're kind of tiny, which is awesome. But then this cap area where the letter is just like one solid piece. And I'd like that to be broken up too. I want to have basically like super tiny pieces all over the place. Okay? Makes it feel more solid being broken apart. Alright, so I'm going to go back to my MoText here and look at the letter. See the lines? The edges? Those edges are defining each face. So if I want more pieces and I want them tinier, I need to have tinier faces. Okay? I need to have more divisions all over this. So on this MoText, that's where I'm going to have to change it. So here's subdivision. Watch when I just click this up. See how it added an extra subdivision here? And so what happens here is that those pieces just got broken up. I'm going to hit undo. Do you see how it's splitting it? You can see it right. I'm pointing to my screen. Do you see it right here? Right there, these two pieces. Now watch when I do it again. Okay, so as I add more subdivisions, it's going to break them up even more. All right, so that's the start of it. Now I need to come down to this area here where it says adaptive, and maybe you change one of these. So it's set to adaptive, so let's try subdivided. Holy cow, look at that. Okay, this broke it up into a whole lot of pieces because it shattered the front too. If I change it to one of the other ones, natural, that does it. If I change it to uniform, that one does it. Okay. Now it didn't do anything for the R, which is kind of surprising. I think it's just because the R hasn't hit it yet. Let's grab our random and just scoot it down. Yep, so it'll do it to the R also, which is cool. Let's go back to our MoText. I can also increase the number here. And by changing that number, we'll get different stuff. I think I want the subdivided one. And that way I can really customize that. I like that. Okay, so I change it to subdivided 7 and 2. You can play with those settings if you want. I'm also going to go to caps. Okay, remember we added bevels to stuff because bevels look awesome. We want that on our text too. There's no bevels on this text, so it looks kind of hideous, especially when I hit Shift R. You can see it's just flat, right? I want to have at least something there. So I'm going to take my caps and change them to fillet caps. I'm going to add some more steps to this. Take my radius down to 2. So I have a nice little fillet happening right there. Gorgeous. The end, which is this side, I could decide whether I wanted to or not. Somebody last semester rendered it from both sides, so they needed the fillet cap on both sides. Totally up to you what you want to do with that. A couple other options. You can see here where it says hull inward. Oops, sorry, different angle. All right, so you can change how that's hitting there. Sometimes you'll just pick a weird font, or you have a weird last name and it just displays it weird and you have to just play with the settings. Here's my hull inward for the, or hole inward for the center of the O. Also constrain. So watch where the text is now. When I hit constrain, it does something kind of funky. If I pick a different font, it probably won't do that, or if I pick a different method. Yep, see I chose natural. And it still does it kind of with the C there. It's kind of weird. There we go. If I do uniform, it doesn't do it. Okay? So, again, sometimes you have to play with these settings. Now, what this constraint is doing, imagine in Illustrator you've outlined text. Okay? In here, what it's doing is taking that outline and using it as a base to draw the text around. But sometimes it's getting a little bit bigger, like bold. Okay? So by hitting constrain, it makes sure that the letter is constrained to that area. Okay? So that you may need that sometimes. It actually works out pretty good because I get a lot of divisions in here, which is awesome. You can create a single object. That really doesn't matter because we have a single object. And then we can change this to quadrangles. Or change it to triangles and just see if we get any better results. Alright, so I'm satisfied with where this is at. Okay? The whole idea with what I'm playing with down here is number one, making sure that my word looks good. And then number two, making sure that my divisions look cool too. Right? Because we don't want to have a big chunk. I don't want to have the A flying off like this. I want that to be broken apart into pieces. Alright, so there's my random. Sweet. Alright, so now the other thing that I want to do to this, I'm going to go back to my poly effect. And I'm going to, I want to move all these pieces away because they're just kind of like floating and staying in space. So I'm going to add what's called a plane effector. And the plane effector is basically what that poly effect was doing originally. Okay? So I'm going to go to the plane. You'll see there it is. It's set to infinite, so we're getting basically the same movement we had before. I'm going to change this to box for now. And I'm just going to line it up with this. And now if I grab both of these and move them, you'll see the kind of effect that we're getting. Okay, now that looks kind of ugly still. I'm going to change this from box to linear. What linear does is it's a start and an end. Okay, you see the arrow that's there on the pointing left. Yes, left. That's where it's going to be affecting. So if I turn it, come on, this way, that's the way that I'm going to animate it. Okay, so as it comes through, see how it breaks it apart? And then once it's gone, it still stays apart, right? So I'm actually going to go backwards with this because I want my name to reveal. I think it's better if it reveals from the first letter to the last letter than people are trying to read it backwards if I go the other way. So if I go this way, okay, so I rotate it 180, and then I animate it this way, then my name comes back together. Okay? Now I still have this issue with all of this like junk kind of floating in space. So let's fix a couple things. I'm going to go to plane, and under the parameter, this is where it's doing what it's doing. Okay? So what happens is, here's an item, it gets broken apart, and it's moving. I'm going to turn this random effector off. I'm going to go to poly effects, and then just uncheck the random. Okay. So what it's doing is it's taking all of these and moving them 100 centimeters in the Y direction. So if my text is here, it's just going to go boop up in the Y direction. Okay? If something is facing this way, its Y direction, even though Y is up this way, its own Y direction might be a different way, which is why they're kind of spread apart. All right? So that's all it's doing. So if I say, well, I want to also scale this, and I'm going to say absolute scale, -1, -1, -1, it disappears. Okay? So instead of just moving it away, it's also scaling it down to nothing. So that now when I drag this through, it's scaling up and getting into place. Okay? So that's a cool effect just right there. I could also add some rotation into this. Oops. 360, 360, 360. Okay? So all of these are the effect of what's happening when it's not put all back together. Okay, when it's put back together, those values don't mean anything. That's where it's basically like starting from and then coming into it. So these numbers here, except for scale, which I always leave at -1, you can just type in whatever, like 250, 550, whatever. Then I'm going to grab my plane again, you'll see. All right, and if you're like, okay, that looks kind of ridiculous how far apart that is, maybe I went too far with the 250, maybe I'll go 60. There we go. So that seems a little bit better, all right? So now, because we don't have the random on there, you can see the effect. It's very like streaky and uniform still, okay? So I'm going to put that back to where he was. I'm going to grab the poly effects, turn the random back on. I'm just going to group these, Alt-G. I'm always going to be animating these together, so why not just leave them like that? And then that's how it's going to be animated, okay? Now, if I want this to be further apart, I can just scale these. Like that. That way my effect will actually take a little bit longer to come together. So now it's going to go like this. As opposed to before, there was kind of like this narrower window where things were coming together. And then I can turn off my line so we can actually see it do it. Okay, now if I want to animate this, just so you can see it, I'm going to pull it back to where everything's gone. I'm going to give myself 120, let's go 150. Drag that up. Go to my null, because that's what's animating. And I'm just animating the X position. And I'm going to go to about 120. Okay, we don't want to go all the way to 150 because we need to have time for the viewer to process what we just wrote on the screen. So that's cool. So now I rewind, I hit play. And then you'll see it all come in like that. Sweet. And then when we do our final camera moves and everything, you know, we'll talk about that another day, but we'll get really close to this so you can really see it kind of like coming together. And we'll talk about some different ways to render it out so it looks really cool. Awesome. Okay, so that's going to be the next assignment. So once your mini room is rendering, you can actually just make a new project and start working on this because you can do stuff while it's rendering. Any questions? Awesome.